actually going to talk about trust, because at its core, what we're doing here is trying to build systems that make trust work. And I think understanding how trust works is real critical. So I want to talk in general about trust, and then talk about technologies like blockchain and what they do for trust. All right, so this morning I landed at Nairobi Airport. I flew in from Accra, and I trusted a whole lot of people. I trusted the pilots on the plane. I trusted everybody around me. I trusted there were police I saw with guns. I trusted that they wouldn't do me harm. I got into a car driven by a stranger who had a sign with my name on it, and I trusted that he would drive me to my hotel safely. On the road, we trusted, I don't know, hundreds, thousands, it was crowded, of other cars. I probably trusted 10,000 things all before 7 a.m. And that's really interesting. And trust is essential for society. Society doesn't work without trust. And we as humans are a surprisingly trusting species. We're sitting in this room. Many of us are strangers, or we just met. We're certainly not related to each other. And we are all sure that nobody will jump up and attack the person sitting next to them. Right? I mean, you kind of laugh, but we are the only species that can get away with that. Any other species would never have this level of trust for non-kin strangers. And we trust in this way thousands of times a day. Society can't function without it. And the fact that we don't even think about it is a measure of how well trust works. So I want to start thinking about it. And I'm a security person, so I think about trust in terms of security. And I think about trust in a way about conceptualizing how society uses security to make itself work. Because in a lot of ways, security enables society. Because security makes trust work, and trust makes society work. And also fundamentally, this is a talk about group interest versus self-interest, and how the group enforces its interests, its norms. Right, so, trust is a complicated concept, and the word is very overloaded. It has many meanings. So there's a personal and intimate trust. When I say that I trust a friend, it is less about that person's specific actions and more about who they are. It's some general statement that they will behave in a trustworthy manner. I trust their intentions, and I know that their good intentions will dictate their actions. That's really what I mean when I say I trust a friend. There's also a sort of a less intimate, less personal trust. And I might not know someone personally or know the motivations, but I can trust their future actions. So I might not know if someone wants to steal, but be fairly confident that they won't. And maybe that trust is more confidence, and that corresponding trustworthiness is more compliance. Another way, I'm reducing trust to consistency or predictability. And really I think about it that they're being cooperative. So in today's society, we trust people, institutions, and systems. Right? It's not really that I trusted the particular pilot this morning, but I trusted the airline that produced them. I trust that Kenya Air knew how to produce well-trained and well-rested pilots on schedule. I mean, it's not that I trusted the taxi driver this morning, but I trusted the system in Nairobi that produces taxi drivers. I put my card in an ATM machine at the airport this morning and got some local currency. And that's sort of an interesting trust. I trusted this complex international banking system that I actually can't even tell you how it works, but that will give me cash and then debit a corresponding amount from my account in the United States with probably some ridiculous fee. And I trusted that would work. Now, this trust is relative, it's fluid, it's multidimensional. So I might trust, I might trust Alice with a $10 loan, but not a $10,000 loan. I might trust Bob with a $10,000 loan, but I wouldn't trust him to babysit an infant. And maybe I trust Carol to babysit an infant, but not with my house key. But I would trust Dave with my house key and not with my intimate secrets. And then I'll trust Ellen with the intimate secrets, but I wouldn't lend her $10. And all of that makes sense, right? I might trust Frank if a friend vouches from him, or, my taxi driver, as long as he's displaying a taxi license, or I might trust my friend Gail as long as she has not been drinking. And then maybe I trust no one with my computer passwords. I'm going to trust the brakes to stop my car. I'll trust ATM machines to give me money. In the United States, there's something called Angie's List, which is a website that will give me recommendations about plumbers and basically home repair people. I'll trust that, even though I kind of have no idea who Angie is. And this is all very human. All right, so this is the way I want to think about this. All complex systems require cooperation to operate. This is true for biological systems, this is true for social systems, and this is true for socio-technical systems. When you think about blockchain, think socio-technical system. In any cooperative system, there is also an alternative parasitic strategy. Right? There's a strategy to be uncooperative. And this would be a tapeworm in your digestive tract. This would be a thief in a market. This would be a spammer on email. This would be someone who doesn't pay taxes. So I'm going to use some game theory terminology. I'm going to call the people who are acting trustworthy as cooperators and the parasites as defectors. And once I do that, I can now use the prisoner's dilemma to really think about this. And if you don't know the prisoner's dilemma, it's a really interesting thought experiment from game theory that looks at the tension between cooperating and defecting. And real-world examples of it are everywhere. It's a robust model to look at human interaction. So the thing about parasites is that they can only survive if they're not too successful. Right? So if the number of defectors gets too large, society collapses. If the tapeworm gets too greedy, you die and it dies. Right? Too many people steal in the market closes down. If there's too much spam, no one reads their email. If too many people don't pay their taxes, you get grease. Right? So there's this fundamental tension between cooperating and defecting in every one of these systems. And it's a tension between us as individuals and us collectively as society. So we might individually want each other's stuff, but we're better off if no one steals. We might individually want not to pay the government, but we're all better off if everyone pays taxes. Actually, more exactly, each of us are better off if everyone cooperates except us. Right? So I'm better off if I live in a society where no one steals, but I'm even better off if I, one, live in that society, and two, get to steal. Right? If everyone else is cooperative, I can be parasitic and get the additional value. But if everyone thinks that way, society collapses. So most of us realize this. It is fundamentally human to understand that it is not in our long-term best interest to act in our short-term self-interest. But not everyone believes this, and that's why we need security. So that's what security does. Fundamentally, security is a tax on the honest. The American forefather said, if all men were angels, no government would be necessary. Right? If everyone was honest, you wouldn't need security. Right? It's an easy banking system if everyone were honest. Figure out how much money you have, write it down, and when you get more or less, just change the number. Just keep the number in your wallet. That would work great as long as everyone is honest. So angels could do that. There would be a truly simple system that would work. And it only fails because cheating would be easy and risk-free, and we would be tempted to do it. So there's a lot here in evolutionary biology that talks about why we're cooperative, why we defect. And basically what we learn is that we tend to survive as a group. So there's a lot of evolutionary pressure to cooperate. But we also compete within a group, so there's conflicting pressure to defect. So what we end up is most of us have a mixed strategy. We cooperate most of the time, we defect some of the time. And depending on who we are, we'll fall in different ways. Right? And there is a human type, a sociopath, which will defect more. But there are very few of them in society, and society tends to work. Right? So no one is 100% cooperator, 100% defector. There's always some sweet spot. And security is how we keep the number of defectors down to an acceptable minimum. And note that acceptable minimum does not equal 0. There is always some crime rate, some murder rate. Right? Some number of people who will take more breakfast than they're allotted. And we can move that number by dialing forward or back the security, and let me talk about that later. So this is how the system works. Right? Security is how we induce cooperation. Cooperation induces trustworthiness. Trustworthiness enables trust, and that keeps society functioning. And note that this analysis is morally blind. I'm not making any claims about the moral stance of the cooperators or the defectors. It's how society enforces its norms. You can imagine an immoral society with immoral norms, and there have been lots of examples in the previous century where the group enforces those immoral norms. And the way they do that is something I'm calling societal pressures. And these are the mechanisms by which we induce cooperation. And we're getting to technology soon. And there are 4 of them. I'll go through them in turn. The first one is morals, a very general term. But a lot of societal pressure, a lot of the pressure to cooperate and not defect, comes from inside our own heads. Most of us don't steal, not because of laws, not because of door locks, but because we believe it is wrong. And there's a lot of this in our brains. Feelings of guilt and feelings of shame when we do wrong, senses of fairness and altruism, desires to be honest, feelings of group belonging, deferences to authority. And different researchers ascribe these, some of them innate and some of them cultural, but they are, as fully functioning adults, in our own heads. And there's a lot of cooperation from that. It is a security system that we have evolved to have. The second is reputation. Now, this is wholly different, and it's actually a lot stronger because it leverages the group. It comes from how others respond to our actions. And this is because that through life we get praised for good behavior, and we get chided for bad behavior. And this is how a lot of informal security works. And if a friend steals my sweater, I'm not going to call the police. I'm just not going to invite him over anymore. Right? I will ostracize him from the group. And we are very sensitive to reputation information about ourselves, about others. We pay a lot of attention to it. It's basically what gossip is, information about other people. And humans are unique on the planet as being the only species who can transfer reputation information. So there are many other species that will remember the actions of individuals. All primates, most corvids, they will recognize individuals and have reputational information. But we are the only species that can transfer it. And so I can tell you about him. And that's very powerful. And we're sensitive to this. There's a great experiment done where, this is at a university in the United States, I think in Pittsburgh. There's a coffee machine, and coffee, you would take, when you take a cup of coffee, you're supposed to put a coin in a box. Right? And this is a system based on honesty. You could cheat, no one's watching. But of course, if everyone cheats, then nobody gets any coffee because they'll take it away. So you're supposed to put a coin in a box. And you can calculate the cheating rate. Right? You know how much coffee is drunk, you count the money in the box, you know the percentage of people that cheated. So what the experimenters did is they put a poster in front of the box with a pair of eyes. And just the pair of eyes, a cartoon image, reduced cheating substantially. When people thought they were being watched, when people were reminded that they could be watched, they were more honest. So these two societal pressures, morals and reputation, are very old. Right? They're as old as human society. And I've seen theories that language developed as a mechanism to transfer reputation information. And some of this is actually even older than humanity. You can see traces of this in other primates and sometimes other mammals. Because this tension exists in all social species between cooperation and defection. So I think of this as sort of our primitive societal pressure toolkit. This is the way we did security pre-civilization. And the problem with it is it only scales to a certain population size. It works real well in small communities, but fails as you aggregate into larger numbers. The number I've seen is about 150 people, and that's Dunbar's number, and the whole other talk. That as society gets bigger, you need more different societal pressures. Right? Larger communities require delegation, require more formalism. So in a sense, laws are a formalism of reputation. And then you get to global systems, they require global laws. And a lot of things require technologies. And technologies to enforce security have increased throughout human history. So let's briefly talk about those too. The third I'm going to call institutional pressures. Because institutions have rules and laws, which are basically norms that have been codified and whose enforcement has been delegated to somebody. Right? And basically, institutional pressures enforce norms by imposing sanctions on those who don't. Right? If you break the law, we'll send you to jail. Sometimes you see institutional pressures work in the form of rewards for people to cooperate, but that's generally less efficient because you have way fewer it's cheaper to punish the few than reward the many. But you will see tax credits as an example of a reward that's institutionalized. And the final mechanism are security systems. And by this I mean mechanisms designed to do specific things, to induce cooperation or prevent defection or induce trust or compel compliance. And these are things like door locks and tall fences, or alarm systems or guards, forensics audit systems, mitigation and recovery systems, all of cryptography. And all of these work together, and this is important. So imagine, the problem is stealing. Most of us don't steal because we know it's wrong. Some of us don't steal because of what our friends think. Fewer of us don't steal because we'll go to jail if we do. And then way up here, there's the few people that don't steal because the door lock is strong. But you have to look at the whole stack. Right? I mean, they work together. You can't just look at the door lock without taking everything else into account. Because the door lock only works because everything else is in place. And you know this because door locks aren't very good. Or think of the eBay feedback mechanism as a reputational security system. It's technology that formalizes a reputation system. But it only works because most people on eBay are basically honest. So you think about it this way. Individuals have to make a cooperate defect decision. Should I steal or should I not? Should I go with the group norm or should I defect and do what's best for me right now? And all of these pressures are the way society puts its finger on the scales. And how well they work depends a lot on context. And society uses this to find some optimal balance between cooperators and defectors. And it's a balance. Right? Too many defectors is too damaging. Too few detectors is too expensive. And society determines the balance. So take crime. If the crime rate gets too high, people in the community say, hey, the crime is too high, we need more police. Crime rate gets too low, people say, why are we wasting money on police? It's pretty safe out there, we have other problems to solve. So in all instances, there's an optimal balance. Right? You're a credit card company, and there is some optimal level of fraud you're willing to tolerate. You could reduce it, but that would be too expensive. You could let it increase, but that would be too expensive. So you look for sort of the bottom of the trough. You look for the cost-benefit ratio that is the most profitable for you. And that will mean allowing some crime and stopping others. So this is the lens I think we need to look at all of these blockchain technologies. Because they are fundamentally mechanisms to prevent defection, to induce cooperation, to make the system work, whatever the system is. So way back in the 90s when I wrote Applied Cryptography, I spent a lot of time writing about cryptographic protocols. And I divide them into three basic categories. There were authenticated protocols, protocols that required a trusted third party in which to work, but they wouldn't work without a trusted third party. There was some hierarchical mechanism. So think of, the password scheme for Facebook. That only works because Facebook is trusted in that system. Now, there might be good reasons to trust Facebook in that system, but that's how the system works. Facebook knows your password, and they compare and they let you in. Now, it kind of failed with Yahoo this past week, but that's the basic idea. It's an authenticated protocol. Then there's something I called an adjudicated protocol, which is a protocol that worked basically by itself, but would have a trusted third party when it failed, when something weird happened. So think of a basic contract. You and I could sign a contract, and no one's involved but us. We agree to the terms, we print 2 copies, we sign it. And we only go to a court if we have a disagreement. So only when the contract fails do we call in a third party. I call that an adjudicated protocol. And then there's a self-enforcing protocol where the math itself enforces the protocol. And you can think of digital cash as an example of that. Right? There's no trusted third party. There's no adjudicator. It's just itself. And I said they were different, and we wanted to, and that we would be smart to move towards these self-enforcing protocols because they're more efficient, and they work better, and we're replacing sort of humans with math. And at this point, I can say that was pretty naive of me. That in fact, all protocols have aspects of each, and it depends how you look at them. So fundamentally, all of these protocols are socio-technical systems. They have a technical part and they have a people part. And part of it is self-enforcing, part of it is part of it is authenticated, part of it is adjudicated. And it really depends on where you look in the system and how you build the protocol to sort of move the boundaries around. There's always something outside the protocol that has people and will have special cases. I mean, the examples from the blockchain world most recently are the big debate about Bitcoin block size and the DAO attack. And sort of both examples where we had protocols that we thought were self-enforcing, but something happened that forced us to break out of the self-enforcing parts and to go into the larger human arbitrated part that might involve courts, might involve meetings, might involve voting and agreement, all the messy stuff, as opposed to the math. And the thing about these different protocols is not that one is better than the other. It's that they fail in different ways. So there are two extremes and we can do electronic money. The first is we find someone we trust to keep the records. Right? So I'm going to make this up. There'll be a big bank. They're going to keep this big database of how much money everybody has. And whenever I give money, someone gives money to somebody else, we just tell the bank and the bank makes the change. That's basically the way debit cards work. It's a perfectly reasonable system. It scales great. It's pretty secure. And requires that every one of us trust the bank or system of banks or group of banks, or the banking system. On the other hand, you have basic David Chaum digital cash, where money can move around in a way that's sort of just as secure, in a way that's just secure against the obvious threats, that doesn't require a bank, doesn't require anybody trusted. Right? The math itself makes it work. Now these have different properties and different failure modes. Right? This one, the bank knows all the transactions. One of the things you give up is privacy. This one, in Xiaomi and Cash, it's pretty good privacy. I don't mean that in the pretty good privacy sense. I mean that in the privacy is actually okay. Right? And Bitcoin's somewhere maybe in the middle. Maybe it's over here. A little less privacy, but certainly not over here. But there's value in the lack of privacy. Because if someone steals money from my account, I could go to the bank, go to the court, and say, hey, I want my money back. And because there's no privacy, I often get my money back. On this end, if someone breaks into my computer and steals my digital cash, I'm done. It's like I put paper under the mattress. Right? So we give up things and we get things in all of the different systems. Right? And Bitcoin is going to have its own trade-offs. It has some anonymity properties, but it also has this property that the bits are bearer instruments. And when you look at the hacks against Bitcoin, nobody hacks the math. They hack the computers the math is on. And if I want to hack Bitcoin, I'm just going to break into your machine and steal your stuff. Or break into an exchange and steal all the stuff. Or in extreme cases, break the protocol and steal everybody's stuff, or the sort of the DAO attack. So when I think about blockchain, I am someone who does not share the blockchain hype. Blockchain is a very specific technology. It's a distributed authentication system. Actually, it's a distributed It's a distributed time-stamping service. It allows us as a group, without any central authority, to collectively timestamp things. And that has some interesting applications. But it only has applications that have a need for a distributed time-stamping service. If you do not need one, then blockchain doesn't give you anything. And there are lots of applications I see which already have a trusted authority. And if you already got one, you might as well use it because you get a lot of benefits from using it. And in some ways, money is it's an outlier of a case. Right? Money is actually, because money is a collective hallucination, a collective service that instantiates that hallucination actually works. But that's in some ways an exception. In most cases, so I've seen, what's an example? Using blockchain for a deed registry. Now, in most cases, that'll make no sense, because a deed registry is fundamentally an authority vested by a government. It's deeds to property. That's physical real estate in a country. And so there is already an authority you must trust in order for any system of property to work. So the question to ask is, why not let that trusted entity handle the records? Now, there might be some reason why they can't. There might be some reason why you need a distributed system. But you have to know what that is. And you have to lay out your model, because as you move to the distributed system, you're going to lose something. The obvious thing you lose is the ability to easily go outside the system and solve problems. Because the more you move to a self-enforcing protocol, the less ability you have to step outside and say, fix this. This is obviously wrong. And which is basically what a court does. I mean, we develop court systems because so much of what we do can have special cases, can have unforeseen cases where we need to go to somebody and say, here's what happened. Figure out what's fair. Because the system we built isn't able to. And it's really what we had to do with the DAO attack. Right? We built a system that didn't foresee the break, and we had to step outside it and say, okay, given what we know now, given what happened, what's the fair thing to do? What's the right thing to do? And you'll always need that. There will never be a system, as long as humans are using it, there'll never be a system that doesn't require that. So, if there's any lesson, is when you look at the systems you design that use blockchain in different ways, look at which parts of the system are self-enforcing, which are authenticated, and which are adjudicated. And notice how what's in each of those buckets changes as you change the characteristics of your system. Notice how the way the system fails changes as you change the characteristics of your system. And then when you do that, you can better decide whether blockchain technology is something that helps, hurts, is neutral but just more complicated. And I think that'll help us design better systems. I mean, right now I think we're just way in the middle of the blockchain hype, that we're seeing blockchain for everything. But, like all security technologies, it has value and is not a panacea. Right? That's true for pretty much everything. And the more we can figure out the value, I think the better we'll do long term. And in some ways we got lucky, because money was the easy case where you could see the value. Right? The value is pulling out a central authority that can manipulate the money supply. Right? For some people's politics, that is a really valuable thing. Right? To move money out of the hands of a government. And that's what this does. It has costs, and we decide to bear those costs because there's a lot of value in having money run by a government. Right? They handle all the problems. I have a trouble finding other examples where you have that clean a cost-benefit analysis. Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much for a really, really useful and interesting explanation of how you see things. I thought that was fascinating. There are one or two points which I would like to discuss with you, and I'm part of the panel, the next panel, so I won't say what I'm going to say on the panel.
Okay.
But going back to the point you made about if all of us were angels, there'd be no need for government, I have to disagree with that, because I think that government isn't really only about security, it's also about policy. What do we want as a people to achieve?
Agreed.
Okay,
this is the security guy's way of looking at government. You're of course 100% correct. There's more to government than arbitrary disagreements, as we're learning in the U.S.
So you said that if you have a trusted authority, then maybe that you don't need blockchain to do whatever the trusted authority is. So, and then sort of built in there was an assumption that the government is a trusted authority. So let's say your government isn't a trusted authority, but they still have like the obligation to do the land registry, for example. But they're corrupt, they don't do what they're supposed to do, or they're just really bad at it. So in the United States, personal property filing system would be an example of we generally trust the United States government to do what they're supposed to do, but it's just not done very well. So are there really two uses or two situations in which it might be useful? One where the trusted authority can't really be trusted because they're not doing what they're supposed to, and B, when they're just really bad at it?
So let me give you some nomenclature. In security, when we use the term trusted authority, we do not mean trustworthy authority. What we mean is a trusted person is a person you must trust in order for the system to operate. They could be corrupt, but you have no choice but to trust them. So for example, at breakfast this morning, the hotel was a trusted authority, right? Because in order for me to eat, I had to trust that they did not poison the food or, serve spoiled food or any of those things. I had no choice but to trust them, right? Trusted person is someone who could break your security. You're giving them the ability to break your security. So they are trusted in that you are forced to trust them, and not trustworthy in that they'll do a good job or they are worthy of your trust. So that's what I mean by trusted authority. So in the example of of property, of real estate, you must trust the government because they have the authority to take your land. Right? They can do it. They have the guns, they have the police. I mean, they have that authority. And you have no choice but to trust them. So the question is, and I don't know the answer to this, given that, is there benefit in pulling the time-stamping service of real estate transactions out of their hands? Now, there might be in some cases, and there might not be, but it's not as clear-cut. I'm not convincing you, I can tell.
I just wonder if the sort of computer security theory that you're applying to government, like if it maps well, right? Because there are communities around the world that choose not to trust the government with their land registries, and they know that their land should be taken, right? But they do it themselves. And
that's right. And that might be smart, and that might be a waste of time, and that's the question, right?
So my question sort of goes back to the original analogy of in a society you'll have people that comply and people that defect. Now, if we want to extend how we develop security systems, considering people that are not members of our society, people that are actively potentially against our society, that want to hack into systems and things like that, do you think the current protocols, the different protocols that you mentioned, are good enough considering that there are people that are active enough that are willing to destroy the society. Not like the parasite analogy, but people that are willing to actually destroy the system.
So it depends. I mean, and this is very situational. There's never one answer. And it will change. It will change based on technology. I mean, I didn't really talk about it here, but I spent a lot of time now thinking about catastrophic risks, which is kind of where you're coming from. That what do you do when the 5 Sigma guy can destroy everything? And there are some really deep problems there that go outside individual systems, right? Because we're assuming, and you keyed onto it, we're assuming that the defector can only do so much damage. That the defector can, steal something and not steal everything. And the question is, how does the equation change when the defector can steal everything, right? Crash every car, for example. Steal all of the money, right? Print a virus that kills the entire planet. I mean, this is science fiction, but it's not stupid science fiction. I mean, we're heading towards there. And after studying it for like a year and a half, I can tell you truly that I don't know. That this is just a new area for humanity. That we've never had a society where individuals have so much power. That they can truly destroy the system. That's just a new thing. And I think this requires some new way of thinking about security, but I don't really have a good answer. But I think you're right to think about that, I mean, not sort of at every day, but as sort of part of the problem. And as we move towards these much more empowered individuals, and the more technological systems where you can fundamentally break the system in ways that you can't in more real world as opposed to digital systems. I mean, the DAO attack, I think, is really interesting because it was an attack that fundamentally broke the system. It makes it different from just breaking in and stealing someone's money. And I think that's a worry. And as systems get more technological, you get more of this ability for these massive breaks. And in some ways, the low tech is security against that. But this is what we talk about voting machines. Then low tech is more secure. Because you can't hack it wholesale, you got to hack it retail. And you hack it retail, it's harder and you're going to get caught.
So my question still go back maybe to touch on the DAO, the attack. So in your presentation, you are saying like, okay, we are depending on the math, the protocol, but we'll always be needing to come back to humans to decide or to choose other paths sometimes. Do you think this will change, especially the development of other technology, especially in artificial intelligence? Do you think it reach a time that the protocol, the math will be so nuanced that it can take care of the human nature, that we won't need to be intervening?
So never. Because there's always a human-computer interface. It's never, the problem with math is that math has no agency. Math can't do anything. It's a bunch of equations on a piece of paper. To make math work, I need to write it in code and put that code on an operating system, in a computer, on a network, with people. And the math might be perfect, but all these other things aren't. And then you get to the person. Right? So you've got this whole spread from the math, pure perfection, to the human, pure imperfection, right? And everything in between. And as long as you have that, I mean, maybe when the robots kill all the people and the robots are just doing it, maybe we'll get it perfect, right? But as long as there are people, you're not. There'll always be that place where the computer touches the person. And that's the place where you're always going to need these human institutions. Because as people, we're going to do things that are unexpected. I mean, it's something simple as Bitcoin, right? We have great math, and someone hacks your wallet and steals your coins. I mean, doesn't that, and I can't make the math so perfect that it'll force you to choose a good password for your wallet. I can't. Because the password is going to be limited by what you can remember and what you feel like doing. I mean, all those human things. And the human never goes away. And I think it's a mistake to think that the math can take over. I mean, the math does some really valuable things, and I'm not minimizing it, because it takes away certain problems. I mean, encryption just going to removes whole classes of attacks off the table. But it doesn't remove them all, always leaves some. And you always have to know what you're leaving. Right? So if any lesson in this talk is just sort of understand what you are and aren't doing. Understand how your threat models are changing, how your attacks and your defenses and your trust flows, how the different systems affect that.
When you arrived here at the Jomo Kenyatta Airport, you trusted the pilot, the plane, the taxi driver. And so I would like to know what you think about, if you look at the societal norm, for example, religion, it's fundamentally based on trust relationship, right? So I will give you an example from my wife trusts every single thing. There is nothing in her world called lie. So how do you really model a trade model that actually reflect these kind of things? Like the trust seems like in some part of the population or society is a kind of a norm.
And I think trust is a norm, because most of us are trustworthy. Right? I mean, my computer's there, and I never looked at it once during this entire hour. Somebody could have grabbed it and ran out, but, you didn't. At least I think you didn't, right? And the reason I think most of us are trusting is because most of us are trustworthy. That, in fact, it is a rational way to approach the world. Now, of course, this changes, right? We live in small communities where everyone knows each other. It's a very different model. We live in an anonymous city. So in the past couple of 100 years, the way we interact as society has changed. So some of our intuitions that we evolved over a couple 100,000 years don't necessarily hold true. And as we move to digital systems, a lot of intuitions fail completely. And I think you really see it on things like Facebook, where we have to deal with privacy policies. And in a sense, we are all, as human beings, extraordinarily adept at privacy policies. I can walk into a room with people I know, people I don't know, and I can instantly calibrate how I behave, what I say, and change it on the fly. We are so good at that as human beings. But transfer that onto a Facebook-like platform, and suddenly I'm clueless, because I just don't have the same social cues. So yeah, I think understanding that we're dealing with the few, pretty much in all cases, that are going to try to break the system. And that changes depending on what the system's like. I mean, a lot of things change. And there's a great research on this. I mean, lots of people have studied these sorts of systems and how people cooperate at effect, or how they lie, and when they cheat, and when they choose not to, and so much research in this. And we learn it's very complex and very much at the core of our being. You could put people in brain scanners and watch their brains as they make the decision. You can see that there are parts of the brain that are optimized for deciding whether to cheat or not, which is kind of neat. Okay, so I agree with you, and I take no issue, and I think you are right, and I think that is itself a security system. And I'm pulling up the page where I talked about some of the different systems, and I mentioned mitigation and recovery systems, and that's part of it. And I mean, I kind of glossed it here, but you're 100% correct that recovering from a security failure is part of security. And in some ways, we get our security from recoverability. That we don't prevent the thing, but we make it so that we can recover. So, you know, my security against ransomware is a good backup. Right? I mean, that's fundamentally a recoverability system. I do have an antivirus, but really, my security is the fact that if my computer gets hit with ransomware, I have a backup next door, and I just recover, and I don't need to go to the system. Now, that's a simple example. You're talking about a more complex one with different parties acting maliciously toward each other and ways to hold them into account. That's also part of security. So, you know, we don't prevent murder. None of us are wearing a bulletproof vest. We prevent murder by detecting it after it occurs, solving the crime, arresting the guilty, punishing him, and through that process, we deter future occurrences. Right? So you need that feedback loop. So I don't mean to leave that out. I mean, I kind of sloughed it off in this talk because this is really about the tech part of the system. But you are right that that is a critical component of these societal pressures that make security. And I didn't mean to give it short shift.